US President Donald Trump has extended his tariff tirade against India, this time with yet another threatening message. In a fresh interaction with a news channel, Trump once again lashed out at India over its continued purchase of Russian oil, building on his earlier threat of a substantial tariff hike beyond the already imposed 25% and the penalty he recently signed. Trump has now warned that the new announcement could come within the next 24 hours, and it doesn't stop there. The US president has also threatened to hike import taxes on Indian pharmaceuticals, potentially as high as 250%. But India isn't backing down from this. The MEA has issued a strong rebuttal to the president's aggressive remarks, firmly reiterating that national interest remains non-negotiable. India has also exposed what it calls Trump's double standards, quote-unquote, on Russia, pointing out how clearly the US has been importing goods and services in massive volumes from Moscow. Even the army showed US the mirror, posting a 1971 newspaper clipping that reveals how US had been exporting arms to Pakistan in their war with India. However, is India's friendship with Russia the only reason why Donald Trump has turned so sour all of a sudden? We're learning that Trump's anger could have been simmering long before this tariff offensive began. And what's rattling him the most? Is it India's growing missile capability, especially the BrahMos, that was deployed so successfully in Operation Sindoor? At least the Wall Street Journal appears to think so. The Wall Street Journal report says that India fired the BrahMos missiles at Pakistan during Operation Sindoor, and the US's suspicion thus is that BrahMos is nuclear capable, its warhead can be miniaturized and therefore used in nuclear attacks. India's stand thus far has been very clear that BrahMos is a conventional cruise missile, and India has said so many times in the public domain as well. Wall Street Journal has reported that US feared BrahMos was armed with nuclear warheads. US suspected that there could be Prahar and Nirbhay missiles that could also be made nuclear capable. Similarly, India has firmly said that it will be abiding by its no first use nuclear policy. That's as far as India's stand is concerned and the concerns that have been expressed by others. Let me quickly bring in Rishabh on this. Rishabh, a number of concerns. There are those who are saying that President Trump was not happy that he's been contradicted. There's now this Wall Street Journal report that talks about the use of the BrahMos. There are other concerns that this could be signaling because India is perhaps growing in stature as an economy and arriving on the global stage. What are your sources telling you in terms of what they understand? The MEA has come out to strongly counter and expose US's hypocrisy as far as trade is concerned with Russia. But what is your understanding and sources telling you as to what the government thinks is the cause for all of this?
Well, Madhav, I'll take just 1 minute. Yesterday, the statement made it very clear what India thinks about Donald Trump and US's accusation about India's purchase of Russian oil. Sources within the External Affairs Ministry and Government of India, for that matter, has very categorically told Times Now that it is enough. India has invested about 5 billion in the trade that it has done post-Russia-Ukraine conflict began in February 2022, while Europe has done it for 65 billion for that matter, which is almost 12 times, more than 12 times of what India has purchased from Russia. Then that showcases that it's not India, it's actually Europe that's fueling Russia's war, if the logic of Donald Trump is adhered to. America also, if you see the website of trade of United States, you will find items which are not even essential for national interest are being purchased and traded between Russia and United States. So on what basis is India being
Absolutely, that's a hypocrisy that India has exposed. And why is India being singled out? We don't know. Is this just a bargaining tool? Is Trump just doing this because he thinks he can get away with it? We don't know at the moment. But Rishabh, thanks so much for joining us. We'll continue to track this story over the next 24 hours. Let's quickly open this up and take it across to our guest. Joining us, Sushant Sareen, a senior fellow of the ORF. We also have Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, who's a defense expert, joining us. He's a former army commander as well. Christopher Clary is a non-resident fellow of the Stimson Center. Dr. Jeffrey Gunter is a former U.S. ambassador joining us. Let me start first and foremost with Christopher Clary. Christopher Clary, I mean, many here in India would think that, this is a rather unbelievable sort of a situation because India has made its stand very clear when it comes to BrahMos. And if a BrahMos missile use has rattled the US president so much, then, I mean, it really raises some serious questions about why he would be so insecure. Christopher Clary.
Yeah, I think we are still trying to come to terms with why the Trump administration was so worried during the May conflict. We have this Wall Street Journal article, which gives us another data point that says that part of those concerns may have had to do with the use of the BrahMos missile, which might be nuclear capable, even if it's not, as you've said in the program earlier, nuclear armed. So there may have been other things going on. We don't know the full range of intelligence inputs, but it's clear based on the Trump administration's behavior and, of course, the president's many subsequent comments that that conflict led to concerns in the White House that appear to have been in excess of the concerns felt in South Bloc in New Delhi or elsewhere in India.
And Lieutenant Raj Shukla, let me bring you in on this. India's been, painstakingly saying for the last 3 decades or so, ever since or close to 3 decades since India made nuclear, about no first use. We've been unequivocal about it, yet people get rattled about it to such an extent. Is there more to this? Is there the fact that India has officially denied Trump's 29-time assertion that he ended a nuclear war between India and Pakistan? Is there more to it because Trump perhaps feels he can get away with it? Is he genuinely trying to push the door open for agricultural products that clearly China is not in a position to buy, but he thinks India can, not looking at the sensitivities? One doesn't understand what really is behind this. By no means am I saying the WSJ report is exhaustive, but these are some of the possibilities. What's your view?
Some of these, Madhav, some of these Western sensibilities, particularly Europe and USA, baffle me. I recall last October 2024, there was a whole brief published on how the Russian shadow fleet was being used to defy Europe's own sanctions. And the principal beneficiary of the violation of those sanctions was Europe itself. In fact, I recall that despite the imposition of the sanctions, for a brief while the Russian economy resurged. And there was a whole Neil Ferguson piece on this. So that is one aspect of it. So if you were violating your own sanctions, now why are you suddenly finding fault with India buying Russian oil? The second point has been doing media headlines since this morning. This whole cheap oil or this oil at a certain cap price was devised by the US to maintain some kind of global stability in energy prices. So that's the second point. The larger issue is this, and that is something we must debate. Is the problem with Trump? Is it with the advisors around him? Is it a larger MAGA problem? Or is there a basic shift in US foreign policy? Just 2 weeks back, I was in Washington with a team from Carnegie, and everybody in state, defense, our own embassy was telling us that despite the mercuriality of Trump, the larger Indo-US relationship was in a sound track and nothing would happen. We returned to Delhi and the very people who spoke to us from state had been sacked. So the point is that, is this Trump? Is this his, close advisors? And now I have a quarrel with his advisors. If you allow Mr. Trump to get away with all this nonsense, I mean, that's the politest word I can use. Every morning a tweet, and you don't stand up to him on anything, are your damn brains connected to your spines? I mean, that's a very serious question. Can you run US foreign policy on this? Ek din kuch. And
we have Dr. Gunter here.
No, and one last point, if I may.
Okay, quickly, please.
Can I just make one last point?
Yeah.
And this is dealing from Trump. There is a wider MAGA view that the Americans need to step back from Asia because they cannot deter China in Taiwan. And that larger steps, if they step back from Asia, they don't need India to balance China. And therefore all these stunts now, one day it is tariffs, one day it is something, because you don't need us. So what really should concern us is the strategic autonomy.
Right.
We have to revisit the strategic autonomy because we do need a technology partner. So energy security is not so much a concern because we have diverse options, but it is a technology partner because Sindoor tells you just flat platforms don't matter. The wraparound technologies are so important. Where do we get them from?
Absolutely.
So these are some thoughts which come to my mind. I'd love to hear Sushant and the others.
Yes, Dr. Jeffrey Gunter is a former U.S. ambassador. Dr. Gunter, I think you're no stranger to the fact that it's taken about 3 decades of across the aisle bipartisan support on both US and India's side to build this relationship from where it existed or where it was in the early 90s and before. Despite all of that, we know how sensitive this relationship and how quickly things can unravel. Despite all of that, we're seeing this kind of positioning coming in from President Trump. Many people are not able to make sense of it. I mean, 250% tariff on pharmaceuticals, something that common Americans would perhaps benefit from. You're going to tax so much. Isn't it at the end of the day the United States and its citizens who are going to really feel the pinch of it?
Great issue. Let me start by saying America, Donald Trump, loves the Indian people, loves Modi. We all remember years back the huge stadiums that we saw both in the United States and in India welcoming Modi and welcoming Donald Trump. They have a tremendous relationship. And just like family members, we negotiate. We do the art of the deal. And much of what Donald Trump is focusing on, to be quite honest, is reciprocity. And if you look at the 30, 40, 50 long relationship that we've had with India, when you look at trade, there has not been reciprocity. India has tariffs. You guys have tariffs. You are very protective of your agriculture and many other aspects that America has basically subsidized for the many years. And now Donald Trump is putting simply America first, and it's working. Our borders are closed. Our inflation is down. Crime is down. So this is part of a greater policy of who I believe is the greatest president we've ever had, of Donald Trump. Sure, it's boisterous. Sure, it attracts some news lines. But I can promise you there's plenty of negotiations going on, and the India-America relationship is solid, and we're basically just saying, hey, America is getting sick of being ripped off financially in all our dealings. And that's what the president
Dr. Gunter, the simple question that many are not able to understand here, sorry I'm interrupting you there, but the point is that why this kind of a verbal attack on India when it's US that's buying so much of the goods from Russia, whether it is uranium, palladium, or it's EU buying LNG. The point is that you have Western powers buying the similar goods from Russia, doing trade with Russia, but when India does it, that becomes a problem.
Well, I think what's going on right now is the hundreds of thousands of people that are dying in Ukraine and Russia. And as we all know, President Trump's really policies are directed to be the president of peace. I know the conflict that went on with India and Pakistan, and I know there's been pushback in the Indian media of whether Trump was responsible for brokering a peace agreement, to stop that current conflict. But nevertheless, the President Trump ran on a simple policy that he's going to end all these wars, he's going to end all the killing.
Well,
and let's face it, when India buys something like 1.7 million gallons per day of oil, of crude from Russia, where does that money go? It goes to the death and destruction of Ukrainians and Russians, and I'm sure that's what President Trump is not happy about.
Let's just rewind and pause. Sorry, Sushant, I'm going to come to you in just a minute, but this is what Eric Garcetti, former US ambassador to India, said. Let's just review what he said a few years earlier.
And we take the smaller victories, like actually they bought Russian oil because we wanted somebody to buy Russian oil at a price cap. That was not a violation or anything. It was actually the design of the policy, because as a commodity, we didn't want oil prices going up, and they fulfilled that.
So that's Eric Garcetti, Dr. Gunter, and he's saying we wanted somebody to buy the Russian oil so that the global prices don't go up. India did exactly that, and now we're getting the brunt for it. It just doesn't make sense.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, and to be quite honest, with all due respect to Ambassador Garcetti, I watched what he did as mayor in Los Angeles, and that was a complete disaster. So he's on the other side of the aisle. He's a Democrat. He's someone who advocates for Joe Biden and Barack Obama.
I don't
know.
Dr. Gunter, with due respect to you, that's domestic politics, and that's all right for, citizens within the United States to have differences, but this is diplomatic issues, and one certainly cannot equate that with domestic politics. Sushant is holding his head. Sushant, your response to what Dr. Gunter is saying.
We've always looked up to the Americans thinking that that was the intellectual hub of the world. And now when I look at America, I wonder what we were thinking of. Because the kind of stuff which I hear from the Americans, man, it makes you want to puke. So a couple of things. One, it's a very strange way of your expressing your love for India by abusing us, by using the most visceral language, by insulting us. And we are a very proud people. You might not, your European fellows might want to call you daddy. I'm sorry, we are not going to do that. We have suffered 1,000 years of colonialism, and we are not wanting to get into a similar arrangement anymore. That's point number one. Point number two is, I think General Shukla makes a mistake when he talks about Trump's advisors. I don't think Trump needs any advice. He is the repository of all the wisdom in the world, and depending on which side of the bed he gets up and what thought strikes his mind and which coterie of his family is advising him at what point of time of the day, he makes a policy. So to think that the advisors have a role to play, clearly they don't. Number three, I keep hearing this thing about India buying Russian oil and fueling the war. Yes, the Indian purchase of Russian oil is fueling the war. The European purchase of Russian oil, which is many times more than the Indian purchase, is not fueling the war. So I don't know, this is some strange mathematics that the American genius has come up with, that the Indian money fuels the war, the European money doesn't. And then for these characters to talk about India's profiting from the war. Now look, here is the thing. If India profits from the war, how does it fuel Russia's war? The Russians are selling us oil at bargain basement prices. Let the Americans sell it to us at the same price. Okay? They want to squeeze you for everything. But so we get oil from the Russians at bargain basement prices, which we process and we sell further. We ensure that there is a certain balance kept in the market. There's no scarcity in the market and the prices don't spoil. Okay, we might be making a few $1 billion out of it. I don't even have the numbers of how many billions we are making, but the Russian economy breaks even at a certain price point of oil. The price of oil is way below that price point. So if we are buying at even more discounted rates, the Russians are not profiting from our purchases of oil. So I don't know where these calculations that these geniuses in the United States are coming up with. And finally, this whole nonsense, it makes you wonder whether we are in the 21st century or you are living in the 15th or the 16th century. Apparently, Mr. Trump and his supporters are living in the 15th or 16th century, which is a mercantilist era. You cannot look at modern trade between countries only in terms of trade deficits. You have to look at it in terms of what is the trade in the services sector. And when you start adding the total trade together, the American and the Indian trade is pretty balanced. So, for example, even if we are, and I think there is a case that we can be less protectionist about some of our industry, we need to push it into competition, but let us assume that the current arrangement stays. Then we start levying very, very heavy tariffs on the services sector, with which the Americans have an amazingly profitable trade and a major surplus. So on what basis are you saying that it's only a one-way street and not a two-way street? In fact, India's trade with the United States is far more balanced than the US trade with the Chinese. But on Chinese, Trump chickens out, right? Yeah. Because the Chinese hold him by his unmentionables. So out there, this entire bravado and this entire bluff and bluster and this boisterousness and this boorishness of Americans goes into their pockets. But with India, they think they can bully us. So fine, bring it on.
Christopher Clary, your response to that? There seems to be not just a whole lot of imbalance in terms of, what's being spoken about by Trump factually, but also, China is not just buying oil from Russia, it happens to be buying oil from Iran, which India doesn't. But there's no such action on China. Why?
As someone that worked for many years and still works to advance U.S.-India relations, this is a sad time to watch this heated rhetoric. And I think the question is, how do we get out of this present cycle? Because as General Shukla said, it's important for India to have a technology partner and it's important for the U.S. to have a partner in India, in Asia. So I do think the deals that the U.S. has reached with Korea and Japan give us a template. Have a big number of investment that may or may not ever materialize. Have a big number of purchases of LNG or similar commodities that India was probably going to buy anyway off the spot market. Say that you'll look into the Russian oil issue, defer some issues, kick them over the negotiators, buy time so that this present period of heightened rhetoric can pass.
Yeah, the whole point, Christopher, is why would you then, if you really want to do business or strike a deal, why would you call someone's economy a dead economy and club it with Russia? Because that's just not making any sense. It happens to be one of the most highest rates of growth amongst the big economies in the world.
Well, when you go into a store and you want to make a deal with someone selling something, you don't say, this is incredible, I would pay any price for it, right? You kind of talk down the item. You say, oh, there's a little nick here, there's a little scratch, it's a little dusty, right? Because you're trying to get a better.
You don't talk down to the extent of saying this is absolutely worthless. Well, the minute you say this is absolutely worthless, then that means you're not going to buy it. That's where the problem is. Bargaining is an art. Art of a Deal is a book that Trump may have written, but the point is he's perhaps taken it a bit too far.
That's possible. My hope is that we can allow for tempers to calm and think about the strategic interests of both New Delhi and Washington. And I think those strategic interests clearly call for a very robust U.S.-India partnership that is one of many partnerships that India will have globally in a multi-aligned foreign policy, but one where we cannot allow this to spiral.
Right. Sushant wants to respond to you very quickly. Yeah, Sushant.
No, there were two things I wanted to respond to. One was, your earlier thing about the missiles. Look, it's the same American administration people who on the 9th of May were saying we have nothing to do with this entire conflict. Let the Indians and the Pakistanis sort it out. And then suddenly on the 10th, they woke up to some kind of nuclear danger, even though the Indian government never called any meeting of the Nuclear Command Authority, while the Pakistanis were calling their Nuclear Command Authority meetings. So if there was anybody trying to convey any kind of a nuclear threat, it was the Paks. It was not us. One. Number two, I am of the same, or was, I should say, of the same view as General Shukla that I think our relationship with the United States was extremely important for us. Partly because it was going to be a technology partner, partly because, we thought we have a lot to gain with this partnership. But today, I have to ask myself a question, can I trust the Americans? Forget about whether we enter into this trade deal or not, whether we manage to get some kind of trade deal. I don't see how anybody in the Indian strategic community will now see the Americans as a credible technology and defense and strategic partner, because who knows, today Trump goes, some other character like him comes into power, considering how American politics is going, and there is no sense or sensibility left in how the Americans are behaving. It's back to what they were like in the 18th century, and that entire concept of the ugly American is staring us in the face.
Dr. Gunta, let me bring in Dr. Gunta on that. I think that's a very valid concern, and this has been spoken about a lot in terms of reliability. It takes years, decades to build up trust, and it perhaps just takes one statement or a couple of statements to shatter that. And that's quite visible in this current context. Dr. Gunta.
Both Modi and Trump will come to a deal that represents the best interest of their people, period. And like the fellow panelist before me said, this is a process. And this is a process. When you walk into a store, you don't tell them how great the product is. You have to make a deal. And what we're seeing here right now is the fact that the trade imbalance between India and America is disproportionate. The tariffs, I think the statistics that I saw, India is probably second in the world for tariffs, extremely protective of their national interest products like their agriculture, like their people. And we're hitting a reset. We're going to actually have a more equitable, reciprocal trade relationship with our great friends. And I promise you, in time, a deal will be made. President Trump will welcome Modi. Modi will welcome President Trump, and we will have a great relationship going forward.
General
During
Shukla,
this time period,
you're very optimistic, sir. You're very optimistic. A lot of people here are not that optimistic at the moment. General Shukla, do you share this optimism?
You know, for the last 2 to 3 years, I was one of the few chaps who was very gung-ho on the Indo-US relationship. And whenever I was, this rosy-eyed, a lot of diplomats would warn me and say, don't trust the Americans. Unfortunately, Trump and his team have made that suspicion a reality. I mean, what is this deal that you are doing when you are destroying a whole relationship in the process? I haven't understood. What is this deal? Deal we've been hearing. I mean, there are other countries who have their own sensibilities. The kind of language you use, the kind of accusations that you make, right. You are drawing, destroying an entire relationship.
Absolutely.
And here you're dealing with countries, these are 5,000, 6,000-year-old civilizations. I mean, please watch your steps.
All right. There's certainly a lot of cues there. And I don't know if President Trump or any of his advisors are watching the broadcast, but certainly a lot of sane advice that his advisors will do very well to follow. For Sushant Sareen, Lieutenant Raj Shukla, Christopher Clary, Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, thanks so much for joining us this evening.